Before I begin, take a breath with me, because what I'm about to say, almost no one is prepared to hear. You don't make most of your decisions. You think you do. You think your choices come from logic, willpower, values, or even the version of you that you consciously present to the world. But the truth is far more unsettling and far more hopeful. Most of the life you're living right now was shaped by a handful of invisible, psychological triggers that got wired into you long before you even knew what the word self meant. And until you see these triggers for what they are, you may spend your whole life feeling like you're fighting battles you never chose. Today, I'm counting down the 5 psychological triggers that control your entire life, the mental patterns that shape your emotions, sabotage your relationships, determine your sense of worth, and quietly dictate every decision you think you're consciously making. And when we get to number 1, everything you believe about your own power will change in a single breath. Because number 1 doesn't just expose the system, it breaks it. So let's begin. Number 5. There's a moment in your childhood you don't remember, but your body does. It was the first time you felt unsafe, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, almost invisible moment. Maybe a parent snapped at you when you were excited. Maybe someone you needed wasn't emotionally available. Maybe you felt unheard, unseen, or small in the presence of someone bigger and louder. Here's the trigger that was born in that moment: the threat filter. The threat filter is the subconscious part of your mind, constantly scanning the world for emotional danger, not physical danger, emotional danger. Rejection, embarrassment, abandonment, failure, disappointment. Your nervous system treats them like predators. And once this trigger forms, it becomes the lens you experience your entire life through. This is why you overthink before sending a text. This is why you rehearse conversations in your head. This is why someone's silence feels like punishment. It's not because you're weak. It's because your mind is trying to prevent a danger it learned about long ago. But here's the twist most people never realize. The threat filter doesn't just protect you from pain. It blocks you from opportunities. It's why you self-sabotage, why you hesitate, why you stay quiet instead of speaking your truth. Your mind is trying to save you from the emotional equivalent of a tiger. But there is no tiger. So what's the shift? It's simple but not easy. You begin by asking yourself one question in moments of panic or hesitation. Is this a real threat or a remembered one? When you do that, you interrupt the old wiring. You create the first crack in the automatic pattern. And that crack matters because the next trigger goes even deeper. Number 4. Every human carries what I call the mirror wound. It's the psychological trigger that forms when you realize, often unconsciously, that your emotional worth is dependent on how others respond to you. This is rooted in attachment theory. But let's say it in plain human language. You'd learned who you were based on the faces around you. If your caregivers mirrored joy, you learned I'm lovable. If they mirrored stress, you learned I'm a burden. If they were inconsistent, you learned I have to work for love. If they were distracted, you learned I'm not important. This trigger is why you read people's moods like weather patterns, why you sense tension in a room the moment you walk in, why you apologize for things that aren't your fault. Your entire emotional system got wired to scan others for signs of safety, approval, or danger. The problem: you end up living your life as a reflection of other people's reactions instead of your own truth. But here's the micro hook. The mirror wound doesn't only control your relationships, it controls your identity. You become whoever the moment needs you to be. Strong for some, quiet for others, invisible when you feel too much. You shape-shift to survive. But here is the moment of transformation. The first step to healing the mirror wound is noticing how many of your decisions aren't actually yours. You pause before you people-please. You breathe before you shrink yourself. You ask, what would I choose if no one else had an opinion here? Because every time you choose your own voice instead of the mirror, the real you grows stronger. And if you think this one hits hard, wait until the next trigger. This is where most people get stuck without realizing why. Number 3. This is the certainty trigger. It's the subconscious need to cling to familiar emotions even painful ones, because your mind prefers predictable suffering over unpredictable freedom. Let me explain this with a simple example. Think about the emotional patterns you've known most of your life. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's chaos. Maybe it's disappointment. Maybe it's the feeling of being not enough. Here's the truth most people never hear. Your mind becomes addicted to the emotional world it grew up in. Not because it liked it, but because it knows how to survive there. If you grew up around instability, calm feels suspicious. If you grew up unheard, kindness feels untrustworthy. If you grew up overlooked, attention feels overwhelming. If you grew up criticized, love feels confusing. This is why you stay in cycles you know are bad for you, why you feel drawn to people who remind you of old wounds, why peace feels uncomfortable, why happiness scares you. Your mind is wired to chase what it already understands. And in psychology, we call this emotional homeostasis. But in human terms, it means this. You will repeat the emotional patterns of your past until you consciously choose something different. So here's the shift. When you feel the urge to run from something good, pause. Your fear in that moment is proof that something new is happening. Growth rarely feels safe at first, but the moment you breathe through the discomfort, you retrain your nervous system to accept a new emotional reality. And speaking of reality, the next trigger might explain almost every argument you've ever had, every dream you've abandoned, and every moment you felt misunderstood. But before we move to number 2, tell me this in the comments, because I want to read your story. Which of these patterns do you feel shaping your life the most right now? Just drop the number. Sometimes naming the pattern is the moment everything changes. Now let's move into the deep water. Number 2, this one is powerful. It's the psychological trigger called identity inertia. And it's the reason change feels impossible, even when you desperately want it. Think of your identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are as a house built over many years. Every memory adds a brick. Every fear becomes a wall. Every belief becomes a room you live in. But here's the catch. Most of these beliefs aren't yours. They were inherited, passed down, absorbed. You learned them from family, culture, rejection, trauma, or moments of survival. And once you absorb a belief about yourself, I'm the quiet one, I'm the anxious one, I'm the one who always messes things up, your mind fights to protect that identity even when it's hurting you. Why? Because to the brain, identity equals safety, predictability, control. So even when new opportunities appear, love, success, peace, confidence, your subconscious pulls you back to the identity you've always known. This is why someone who's always felt unworthy might sabotage a healthy relationship. Why someone who grew up in chaos feels restless when life becomes calm. Why someone raised to be selfless struggles to set boundaries. Why someone who's been judged becomes terrified of being seen. Your identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's the breakthrough. Your identity is not you, it's a story you've rehearsed. And stories can be rewritten. Deep psychology shows that identity changes when two things happen at the same time: awareness and action. When you notice the old belief in real time, and then choose a behavior that contradicts it. For the person who believes, I don't deserve good things, this might look like receiving a compliment without rejecting it. For the person who believes, I have to be strong for everyone, it might mean asking for help. Small contradictions reshape identity faster than willpower ever could. But all of this leads us to the final truth, the one most people never discover, the one that breaks the entire system you've lived in your whole life. This is the revelation that can free you from every trigger we've talked about. Here it is. Number 1, the deepest psychological trigger that controls your entire life is the unconscious contract you made with your younger self. We all make one, every single one of us. In a moment of fear or abandonment or shame or pain, you made a silent promise to protect yourself at all costs. A promise like, I'll never let anyone hurt me again. I'll never be the problem. I'll never show weakness. I'll never need anyone. I'll always be perfect. I'll always be the strong one. I'll stay small so no one targets me. This unconscious contract becomes the blueprint of your life. It controls your relationships. It shapes your emotional patterns. It dictates what risks you take. It determines the kind of love you allow. It decides how much joy you feel safe receiving. And here's the heartbreaking part. The contract was created by a child, a younger version of you who didn't have the emotional tools, the wisdom or the safety you have now. You built your adult life on a child's survival strategy. That strategy kept you safe, but now it keeps you small. This is why your growth feels blocked. Why you hesitate when you want to leap. Why you keep shrinking when you want to expand. Why you say, "I'm fine," when you're breaking inside. Your unconscious contract is still running the show until you consciously rewrite it. So take a moment right now and ask yourself gently, what promise did I make to myself when I was hurting? When did I first decide to hide my feelings? When did I first learn not to trust? When did I decide love had to be earned? When did I promise myself I'd never be vulnerable? Because here's the liberating truth. You don't have to keep that promise anymore. You are no longer the child who made it. You have tools now. You have wisdom now. You have a voice now. You have options now. You have strength now. You have choice now. Letting go of that contract doesn't betray your younger self. It frees them. It gives them the life they always deserved. And this is the moment the system breaks. When you choose a new contract. Something like, I choose truth over fear. I choose connection instead of self-protection. I choose growth over familiarity. I choose peace over survival mode. I choose to be seen. I choose to be enough. When you rewrite that contract, every other psychological trigger loses its power. The threat filter softens. The mirror wound begins to heal. The certainty trigger loosens its grip. Identity inertia crumbles. This is the moment your life begins again. Before we close, I want to ask you something deeply personal because your answer matters. Which number hit you the hardest? Which one felt like it was speaking directly to you? Tell me in the comments. Naming it is the first step toward rewriting it. And if this message reminded you that the blueprint for your freedom is already inside you, share it with one person who you love. One person who you know is still living inside an old contract. One person who needs to hear that their future is bigger than their past. And if you want to keep growing with me, gently subscribe. Because every day, I'll be right here helping you build a life based on radical honesty, deep wisdom, and unbreakable self-respect. You're closer to your breakthrough than you think, and I'm proud of you for being here.